to Bent Not Broken, where we empower and motivate women by sharing real life stories of adversity and provide expert advice on how to overcome those obstacles and help you live your best life. Now here's your host, Juanita Kelly.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 7 of Bent Not Broken. I'm your host, Juanita Kelly. So many of us struggle with traumas from our childhood. These traumas, if left unaddressed, can affect our everyday adult lives. They can affect the way we treat others, the way we address situations that trigger our fight or flight responses, and also the way we treat ourselves. Today, we take a closer look at childhood sexual abuse and the impact that it has on the lives of survivors like me. Some of us have worked our entire lives to hide the childhood abuse that we withstood. Some of us have had our innocence taken away, while others of us were beaten or neglected by those who were meant to protect us. Many survivors, like myself, keep all of our childhood abuse hidden deep within us. I tried my best to keep it tucked away in hopes that I would forget it or somehow it would just disappear. But it didn't. The triggers are always there, and sometimes they snuck up on me when I least expected it, leaving me to face the trauma of my childhood again and again. On today's episode, we'll be talking about surviving childhood abuse with author and speaker Elona Washington. Today's episode is entitled, I Survived Child Abuse. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Bent Not Broken. Today I have the pleasure of having Elona Washington join us as a guest. Elona is an inspirational speaker and best-selling author who has worked as an activist for RAINN, which stands for Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network, since 2011. As a child, she endured sexual abuse from the ages of 7 to 12. Elona struggled with her sexuality and found herself working as an exotic dancer. As she got older, she found what she believed to be the love of her life, and she got married. Once she realized her marriage was unhealthy and noticed it mirrored the abuse that she suffered as a child, Elona began to seek help and heal from her past traumas. Today, she works to help other women who have endured similar traumas. Elona, welcome to Bent Not Broken.
Thank you for having me.
Let me just tell you something. I really have been moved by your story. Have you ever had something or read something that just kind of moved your spirit?
Yeah.
And your story did that to me. And when my producers came to me and said, we have to really bring this girl in and hear her story and share with everyone, I was gung-ho. I want to go back to your life as a child before you hit the age of 7. How was life for you back then?
Actually, it started when I was 5. So I don't remember anything before that. I remember little bits and pieces of my childhood, like a nightgown that I wore, like how in the 70s they had like Wonder Woman underwear and all of that. I used to love that.
Me too, the underoos.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And the house that we grew up in, because I was raised by my grandmother. My mother was off at college. So like everyone has these stories of their teachers and with their kindergarten class. I don't remember any of that. Like, I don't even remember the time I spent with my father. I did so much blocking out that I just don't recall much of my childhood.
Mm-hmm. So when the sexual abuse started at age 5, you don't really recall too much what happened?
I do recall the first memory I have of it. He was considered my cousin, but my grandmother took him in because his mother was on drugs. So he was raised by us. I don't think we ever saw his mother again to this day. But I used to sleep, in the same bed with my sister over by my grandma. And he would just sneak in the room, pick me up, take me to the back room of the basement and have sex with me. I was like, 5, 6, 7. I just remember them as dreams.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And then it happened so frequently, and then it started happening during the day. And then that's when I was putting together what was happening at night to what was happening during the day.
So as a young child, you had to endure this sexual abuse. How old was the young man that was molesting and abusing you?
He wasn't an adult. I know he was a kid too, but I always say a lot older because they just seem so much bigger than me.
Yeah.
I would say he's about at least 5 years older than I was.
Okay. And so this abuse went on for all of these years, and you never thought that maybe you should say something to your grandmother, or did you ever have an opportunity that you tried to talk to someone about this?
I would get mad and say, I'm going to tell grandma. And then he would tell me, I'm going to tell grandma what you're doing. You're going to get in trouble.
You were afraid. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was afraid. And, my mother was mean. It was the 70s. They didn't play games back then,
Mm-hmm.
And then grandma had the switch. She was always finding a reason for us to get a switch off the tree. And I just thought, as a little 5-year-old kid that I was going to get in trouble. What made it worse was when we moved to New Jersey, I suffered the same way. And they threatened me in the same way too.
So you were molested and abused again when you moved from this one house to another location. Is it by the same person or a different person?
I moved to an entirely different state. These people didn't know each other, and I was abused again. So
Wow.
I was in the 2nd grade when it started, and that connection made me think that there was something wrong with me. This would only happen to someone like me. God doesn't protect me. There's something about me that makes these boys want to do this.
Wow. So at 7 years old, you're now being molested and raped basically by a second young man, and you're in a different location and your family has no idea of what's going on. And you're afraid to divulge this to anyone because you felt as though it was your fault. What was the next 4 years from 7 to 12? What was it like living in that home, in that environment? What was going on?
So my mother had married a man, she was from DC, and then she went to Princeton and she married a guy who lived right down the street from Princeton University. So, we were uppity for a while. And I remember begging to see my dad. And then my mother yelling and cussing at me for wanting to see my father. So I remember feeling like my mother didn't like me or love me. Like I was always getting in trouble. Something was always wrong. My sister, who was younger, was, the princess, and I was the ugly duckling. So life in my house, I had nowhere to turn. My sister saw what all the boys were doing, and then she would blame me, calling me a freak and all of that stuff. But, she wasn't aware until she was an adult that I was actually protecting her, because the times that they would try to pull her into the room, I would stop it and I would just go into the room a second time. And then what's crazy, over the years, it was my best friend's brother who was doing it. And he was about 5 or 6 years older than me, just so you can understand of how small I was. I graduated high school at 92 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
So
you're a small girl. Mm-hmm.
Right. And I'm 5'2" right now.
Petite. Mm-hmm.
So yes, I was a tiny little girl and I always looked young for my age. So when he started to molest me, he was also molesting his sister. And I hate to say molesting because that's soft. He was raping us. He was sexually abusing us. He tried to get my sister in his room, but I would say no. And I would go in another time. And he would tell me stuff like, if a man wants to do it to you, you're supposed to let him. He had a girlfriend at the time. He was in high school, but he said, I'd rather have sex with you than with my girlfriend. He was sex with me was better in some way. I don't remember because I try to zone out. But once he said, if a guy wants to have sex with you, you're supposed to let him, all of his friends started yelling at me to come to their house. Mm-hmm. And, I just want to go outside and play or see my friend, just swing on the swings. But if I'm there, they were like, Elona, come over here. I'm going to tell your mother what you've been doing. So that was the threat all those years. So I always felt like I had to go or they're going to tell. I say I can't even remember the number of abusers I had, but I say I had more than 10 sexual partners before I was 10 years old.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. I always felt like I just did what they wanted and I didn't make a fuss, that they wouldn't tell my mother, but they told my mother. And the adults in the community knew, the other kids knew, they were calling me all types of freaks and stuff. So all my life as a child, being abused in the same way in 2 different states by dudes who don't know each other. And both of those same set of dudes are telling me that it's my fault. And then the people who know, instead of protecting me, are name calling me like it's my fault.
Shaming you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, shaming me. And I didn't want it to happen. I just wanted to be a child. By the time I hit puberty with the hormones and with that thinking in my head, I was a mess. You couldn't tell me nothing. I was promiscuous.
Of course, because your first, 7 years of sexual activity, you were a child and that's what you knew.
Right.
So when the hormone starts going, that's what you know. What happened through your high school years?
During high school, I was the good girl, the light nerdy girl at high school, but I did all my dirt at my cousin's house. Like I would go into the city, into DC and do all of that stuff. I was a little fast around my neighborhood too, but not as fast. I did most of it outside of school. I was anorexic, tried to run away from home, but common sense kicked in. So that never really lasted long. I tried to commit suicide. I'm going to be 50 on May 5th, and I'm choking up just to say it. It's going to be the first time in my life I'm starting a decade where I'm not going to try to kill myself. Like I've tried to kill myself at every single decade, and it stops at 50.
Well, I'm happy that you want to be here, and I'm happy that you've made a decision to say that thought and those feelings and that emotion is stopping now. And that's wonderful. I want you to know that you're not the only one. You're not the only one. You're not alone, because I felt the same way you felt. The reason why I started this podcast, I can go back to being a little girl, the same age as you, a little younger, and having those experiences myself. And I held that inside of me for decades and decades and decades. And when I started to get older and I had a daughter of my own, I wanted to make sure that those things never happened to her. And I've grown to be very overprotective because of that. So I just want you to know that you're not alone, and it's okay.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm so thankful that you're saying this year at 50, and God bless you for being 50 years old and making it to 50, that you are not going to have those thoughts anymore. And that's wonderful. Trauma's hard, and dealing with it is hard. So you sat down and wrote a book about your experiences of your childhood and your young adulthood. Was writing your memoir, did you find it to be therapeutic?
Incredibly therapeutic. And I've always been a logical person. Like I was never good at math, but I took statistics in college and I was like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. And they say if A plus B is C. And so I've always been a very reasonable person. So once I started mapping out everything that happened, and the timeline in which it happened and how I was feeling and what I was going through, I was like, oh, dang, this is a recipe for disaster. Like I was a latchkey kid when we lived in New Jersey. I was responsible for getting off the bus and taking care of my kindergarten age sister. So there was nobody to protect me. And then even if...
Well, you were protecting her. That's
right.
What it sounds like, yeah.
Right.
You had the responsibility of not only taking care of yourself, but making sure that no one hurt her. That's a hell of a responsibility for a small child to be dealing with.
Right. Just having that latchkey kid syndrome, having a mother that you couldn't confide in or go to or talk to. In just the 70s, there wasn't, Me Too. There wasn't any resources that I could go to get help or a book I could look up. And then just people's ignorance. Just blaming the victim and all the slut shaming that went in back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So it's just a recipe for disaster.
So as you got older, you started working in the adult industry and you became an exotic dancer. When you look back at your time dancing, what is your biggest takeaway from those experiences?
I would say I honestly grew up in a strip club because I was a hot mess. Like how they say today, we're not teaching our children life skills, like they don't know anything about credit or how to open a bank account or anything like that. So I turned 18. I wanted to go to college. I couldn't. I ended up getting pregnant and I just had to wing it. Like my mother wasn't going to help me. She told me she wasn't going to help me. So I had to grow up while raising this little girl also. And I was still promiscuous. It was the age of AIDS. I was still having unprotected sex. I was still hopping in cars with complete strangers, letting strange men up in my house, but not around my child. That much I knew was never going to happen. But the risky behavior that I participated in always had to do with me, not her. So I was just a mess. I don't understand why I'm not dead or kidnapped or on drugs or in some insane asylum right now.
Because you're supposed to be here.
Right, exactly.
Because you're supposed to be here.
But when I started dancing, I grew up. Like I stopped that and I just got my power. My first time on the stage, I was horrible, of course. I was drunk, of course. But I stood there and I was naked and all the other women were naked and we were looking at the guys. And I was like, this is the first time that I have power over guys. So I'm going to use this power and get what I want. I'm not going to let them take anything from me ever again.
So being on the stage empowered you.
Definitely.
And you felt like you were in control, finally.
Yep. And I got game. Like I had no game. I was just a mess. I was a mess.
How long did you work in the adult industry?
5 years.
And your time that you spent there working in the adult industry, you look back on it as a moment in your life that you said, I've regained my sense of self and I know who I am. This situation helped you.
I can't even say regain because I didn't really have a sense of self, but I started to have an identity. Yes. You know, I went to Howard, I graduated, I pledged, all of that stuff. But when I walked in the strip club, and I say this every time I speak, I felt more comfortable there than I had at my mom's house, on campus at Howard, or even in church. I felt like that's where I belonged because that was how I was so used to feeling. So I guess regaining myself, but it wasn't my true self. It was the self that was pushed upon me. But I did learn strength and I did get some power. So I got some good stuff from it, but I still had to undo a lot of the identity that I had when I was dancing.
So you found yourself in a relationship and happy, married, right? And what happened? I know that you eventually realized that you were in an unhealthy relationship.
I realized it before we ever got married. I used to tell him that he talked to me the way my abusers did. And then like later in life, you know, I would say, you love me like my mom loved me. So it was trauma bonding or just a familiar feeling, but it wasn't really love because, you know, God defined love in the Bible, 1 Corinthians. So I went to what I was accustomed to feeling.
So you find yourself married and one day you kind of woke up and you realized that this is the same abuse. It mirrored what you were going through as a child, and yet you got out of it. Did you find it hard to confront your husband and say, I want out of this marriage?
We would fight in the beginning, probably like once a month, and I would say that, you know, but about year 7.
Wow. So you were with him for 7 years.
Oh, no. I was with him for 12 years.
12 years?
Yes, because I was a new Christian and you're not supposed to get a divorce. So I figured this is what the marriage that God wanted me to have, but it wasn't a God ordained marriage. And it surely wasn't a covenant on either side. But I kept threatening divorce. And then I really, really got saved at around year 7. And I said, if this is the marriage I'm supposed to be in, then I'm going to make the best of it. You know, and I changed my behavior towards him. Like I stopped fighting, stopped yelling, stopped threatening divorce. But he became more silent and became more distant. And I think he was trying to recreate his childhood too. You know, like he didn't want peace.
So like hurt people, basically.
Exactly.
And when you finally found the strength to move on and leave the situation and get a divorce, and you went into start to heal yourself and deal with your past traumas, what was that like?
So I actually ended up with a brain aneurysm from the stress. My girlfriend that I used to dance with was murdered. And my husband was giving me the silent treatment. And he was like doing like really petty, vicious things to me and getting our son involved too. And then there was a time when I thought he was going to hit me, first with his hand and then with the bedroom door. So I got an apartment and I told him he needed anger management. He never went to anger management. He had our son come into the bedroom and say, Daddy found a girl that he wants to marry. So that's how my marriage ended.
What? Whoa, wait. So you mean to tell me he had
my 10-year-old
son
10-year-old
come and tell you that the marriage was over, that he found another woman?
Yes.
Wow. I'm so sorry to hear that. That's horrible.
Yeah. And I think it's horrible for my son too, you know, because he's
put a child in that situation like that.
Yes. And he continually put our child in the middle. He still does now.
So now you got a divorce and you got out of that horrible 12-year-long situation. And
12 years a slave. That's what I call it.
That's horrible. So you got out of the situation and you started to go through therapy?
No. No.
So how did you start to heal from the traumas? What did you do? What was helping you to kind of heal from your past?
Writing the book. And
that helps a lot. Yes.
Yeah. Writing the book helped. and speaking. So I had started speaking for RAIN in 2011. So I always spoke to survivors and, people who were survivor adjacent. But once I wrote the book, I opened my story up to the world, people who possibly couldn't understand or had never been in my situation. And I was scared. I still am scared, but I never really received any backlash or any cyberbullying or anything like that. So finding a community of other survivors, especially on Twitter, oh my gosh, they're so outspoken. It helped me. And I thought I was fine, but it's the strangest thing. I just realized this back in December. For a while, I thought I had DID, dissociative identity disorder, where I thought there was like two people in me. And my psychologist, I started counseling on a regular basis, like last September up until this December. So that's the most consistent therapy I've ever had. Everything else, like maybe 3 months here, 3 months here, and that's it. I have this job and the job is stressing me the hell out. Everybody's stressing me the hell out. I guess jobs have always stressed me the hell out, right? So everything was just too much, just piled onto me emotionally. So I started therapy, and I've always been a nasty little girl, like slick in the mouth, quick to cut you down. Like I can look at you, size you up, and I can read you. Like I've always had that skill, but I had suppressed it for a long time, but it started to come back, and I started to like attack people, and I couldn't understand like what was going on with me. And it had been going on for a few years, and I got this job. Like during the day, I use my middle name because I don't want them to find me with my first name, with the book and everything like that. So I remember I confided in my boss about my book and everything. And she's like, don't let these women find out. So that made me super, super defensive. So I would go to work. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, these women are going to find out. They're going to, bash me. I'm going to lose my job. They're going to, just do whatever. So it made me really, really mean to them. And
it was your defense mechanism.
It was my defense. It was my defense mechanism. And then I don't know, sometime in December, like my boss and I were like besties. We loved each other to death. And even I ruined that relationship because, like how you're cut and then you start to heal. But before you start to heal, the pus comes out. Yeah, I was the pus. I was just a pussy person.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
I told my therapist, like I had this aha moment, like where it all started. She's like, where did it all start? I said, it all started in 2016 when I published that book, because that book was on the outside of the world. So I remember when I started my Facebook page, I used to look in the mirror and say, it's not your fault, and break down crying because I was still healing. I wasn't doing therapy. I was doing my own therapy, right? One day I remember looking in that mirror and saying, I'm going to protect you. And I was talking to my inner child. I was like, I'm not going to let anybody get to you. So since 2016, I've had a mental split between me and my inner child. I would refer to myself in the third person when I was talking about being abused, when I was talking about anything that she went to. Shit, I just did it again. But I made...
Well, that's understandable because you're looking at yourself as that's another person. That's another part of me. I completely get it.
Right. And so I was doing everything I could to protect that inner child.
And you wanted to make sure that child inside of you was protected from the mean girls or the potential mean girls at work.
Right.
So you figured, you know what? I'm going to be a bitch to them before they're a bitch to me, right?
Exactly.
Got it.
Yep. That's exactly what it was.
So what happened with that job?
I'm still there. Yeah, I'm still there.
And are you still being mean to the girls?
Oh, no. I'm an entirely different person. It's like I had a lobotomy.
That's wonderful. Are you happy? Are you in a good space where if they happen to find out that you are this accomplished writer and have had such an extensive life full of, so many traumas and so many overcoming so many different, obstacles, would you be embarrassed?
I wouldn't. And I've been telling myself this for years, but obviously I never believed it. If anybody could slut shame me or condemn me for the choices that I made, then they're doing that to all survivors, because I wasn't raised that way. And 70% of strippers and like 90-something% of prostitutes were sexually abused or raped. So yeah, to make fun of those choices is to make fun of the abuse that we suffered.
What do you see yourself doing in the future?
Well, I realized that my spirit can't handle all of the talk about sexual assault, apparently, because, my inner child needs a lot more care than I imagined. I've opened my platform up because over the years when I was speaking, people could relate to me and the shame and the embarrassment and the guilt, the reasons for drinking and, all of that other stuff. But their story was different. They were never sexually abused. They might have been abandoned by their parents, or they might have been physically abused by their boyfriend. So my platform now is Power from Pain, and it's to help all women, mostly men too, of course, heal from the pain of their past. So it doesn't necessarily have to be about sexual abuse. I just want to do more work with people who decide to write their memoir or tell their story, because it's therapeutic and it's hard. And a lot of people, they start it, something stops them from completing it. And I like to coach them. And I like to coach them through the process and help them with the book marketing aspect of it as well.
That's wonderful. Well, you know what, Elona, you've shared some tremendous insight today with us. And you are proof positive that anything is possible and anyone can overcome any obstacle. How can our listeners at home find more information about you online and about your services that you're providing and even your book?
All of my social media handles is the same thing. I'm a marketer. I'm consistent. So it's my first and last name, Elona Washington. You could type in Elona Washington on Amazon. I have a blog, powerfrompain.com, and a YouTube channel of the same name. And I interview people just like you who have been through some challenges and talk about how they overcame it. And that is the best way to reach me.
That's wonderful. And I want to tell everyone that they need to go find you on YouTube, follow you on social media. And if you're suffering from any kind of past traumas and you're thinking about writing a book, if you need help or guidance, please reach out to Elona and she'll be here to help you.
Yes.
Elona, thank you very much for spending some time with us today and sharing your story.
I appreciate it.
On the next episode of Bent Not Broken, we talk with domestic violence survivor and motivational speaker Bonnie May as we discuss abusive relationships. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.
This has been Bent Not Broken with Juanita Kelly. Thanks for listening. You can find us online at www.bentnotbroken.co, all major podcast platforms and YouTube. Be sure to follow us on social media at Bent Not Broken Podcast.